Hello and welcome to the next episode of my tutorial series, Keyboard and Theory Basics on Synthesizers. So in the last episode, I introduced a little about what I was hoping to achieve in this series. I named the keys on the keyboard, I talked a little bit about sharps and flats, and in this episode we're going to talk about what's called intervals. So firstly, what is an interval? Well, an interval is a way of referring to the amount of distance between a pair of keys on the keyboard. You will hopefully remember that the keys were referred to as C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and there were sharps or flats that can also be referred to. Each of these keys and their flat or sharp is placed on the same line of the staff or the musical written sheet music. This is the foundation of what's called a generic interval. So a generic interval is the way to refer to how many lines on the staff fall between one note and another note. So specifically, we refer to the distance between a note and itself as a generic interval of 1. We refer to it, the distance between a note and one above or one below, as an interval of 2. Something 2 above, we call an interval of 3. Something 3 above, we call an interval of 4. So this generic interval means that the distance between C and F sharp generically is 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would say this is a type of fourth. There is a thing called a specific interval which we use to describe exactly what that is, but a generic interval simply says this is the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7 with respect to a root. So if I started on A, that would be my root. A would be the 1, this would be the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the 8 is A. You can actually continuing the numbering above the 8, and that is sometimes used when referring to chords. But for now, all you need to know is that it's possible to refer to the distance between a pair of keys, or where one key is relative to another, by these numbers. So a G to a D, this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So D is a fifth generic interval of the G. D is a fifth of G. So what other type of intervals are there? Well, clearly there are other keys on the keyboard. So when we're only talking about these notes and how they correspond to lines on a staff, these correspond to notes in a scale. I haven't introduced scales, but a scale is a set of the notes that we know will work together harmonically and melodically. So a generic interval is just describing how many lines on the staff fall between them, but in practice we want to know how they're tonally related. So last episode I introduced the concept of an octave. I didn't tell you what an octave is tonally. An octave tonally is a doubling in frequency. So this note is twice the pitch, this note is twice the pitch. An octave, also known as an eighth. So what are the pitches of the other notes that lie here with respect to one another? Well, the way they're described is the frequency of each note and the one above it has a fixed ratio, such that when we apply this ratio over and over again, when we get to this note, we have doubled the frequency. This is called equal temperament. It is not the only tuning available, but is the tuning we will be assuming going forward. So let's see how many notes there are in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and this would be the 12th. So what does it mean to have 12 notes? Well, these 12 notes we refer to as chromatic. Chromatic means ascending up adjacent keys on the keyboard, as opposed to only looking at the white keys or only looking at certain sharps and flats where there is only one instance each of the notes A through G, which is called diatonic. So we can move up the keyboard chromatically, or we can move up the keyboard diatonically. That's a diatonic scale. That is a chromatic ascent. So what do we refer to these intervals as? Well, one of the things to note is that depending where you learnt music theory, The tonal difference between one note and the note above it is sometimes referred to as a half step, and it's sometimes referred to as a semitone. And going up 2 is sometimes referred to as a whole step, or sometimes referred to as a tone. Just different naming. So what do we do with this numbering? Well, for example, I could say, what is the distance between these two notes, the C and the G? I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I could say there is a chromatic interval of 7 semitones or 7 half steps between these keys. That's a perfectly legitimate way of phrasing it, but typically we use a different nomenclature called the specific interval. So a specific interval uses the generic interval 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but adds a qualifier to those intervals to indicate which note chromatically it corresponds to. So the 1 is just known as the 1, but the note above it can be referred to as an augmented 1. You don't particularly need to know that, but 1, augmented 1. This note is sometimes known as the major 2. The note below it is known as the minor 2. The note above it is known as the augmented 2. The E is known as the 3. The note below it is known as the minor 3. The note above it is known as the augmented 3. The next note is known as the 4. Sometimes it's called the perfect 4. The note above the perfect 4 is called the augmented 4. Below the perfect 4 is known as the diminished 4. The next note is the 5. The 5th is important for various reasons. The main reason is it is the closest note on an equal temperament keyboard to the 3rd harmonic. I haven't introduced the concept of harmonics, but they are multiples of a frequency. So when I say an octave is a doubling of frequency, the next harmonic is a tripling of that frequency. So a tripling of that frequency puts us in on this note approximately the octave above. So the 5th is an important note. This is the perfect 5th. Below it is the diminished 5th. Above it is the augmented 5th. The next note is usually called the minor 6th. Below the minor 6th is the diminished 6th. Above the minor 6th is the major 6th. The next note is usually referred to as the major 7th. The note below it is the minor 7th. The note below that is the diminished 7th. And this would be known as the 8th, just like the 1. Sometimes the 1 is called the perfect 1 and the 8 might be called the perfect 8. So this is the naming that's used. Why do we care about this naming? We care about it because these specific intervals are how scales are constructed. And scales are sets of notes that go together in a harmonic and melodic context. So for example, let's have a look at the keyboard. We want to know what interval this is. So we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5 semitones up. 5 semitones, we could call it a chromatic 5 semitone interval. We could also refer to it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a perfect 4th. So this interval and this interval are both referred to as a perfect 4th. I think that's about all I would like to discuss about intervals for now. This is a slightly theoretic aspect of the discussion, but we are going to build upon this in later episodes as we introduce the concepts of scales and we introduce the concepts of harmony and of playing chords. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you join me for more episodes in this series, but in any case, thank you and goodbye.